Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back. Lots going on with the immigration situation and ICE, and we're going to dig back into that. What's law got to do with it is the name of the program. Our professional of the year, a long career in law. Nossaman in New York City is the firm she is with her team. And I like to say that we don't do politics here. We look at both sides, kind of analyze what's going on, and do that through the lens of a legal eye. And we've got her here today. Carol Sigmond joins us on the program. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Steve. How are you today?
My head is spinning because there's always something new with this subject. And what's out there right now, which we're going to deal into, is really how to address this whole situation between the Democrats, the Republicans, potential shutdown, so many different pieces of this particular puzzle. Where should we start today?
I would like to start with what I think is the common ground in the United States among just people, like just regular people. And I think the general view is that lots of Americans would like to see fewer illegal or undocumented workers in the country for lots of reasons. People have all sorts of different reasons, and we don't need to go into them, but just that seems to be a popular view, and I accept it. Mm-hmm. But in the same way that Americans did not like violence on the part of the police, think about Rodney King, think about many of these other incidents.
Yep.
The public doesn't like that either. So they're uncomfortable with what they're seeing. And what I think we should talk about today, if you don't mind, is how we can, have a more sophisticated and safer manner for ICE and to operate in these big cities. And I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think we know what we need to do. We just got to do it. And I don't think any of the politicians are really boring in on this in a very efficient way. I mean, whether they don't understand the details of policing and what that takes, or they don't understand the details of what they're trying to accomplish, because politicians, legislators in particular, tend to be policymakers, not detail-oriented. And they're struggling to craft a policy that will meet both sets of needs that the American people have expressed. We need to have fewer undocumented workers in the country. We need to have better border control. At the same time, we don't want to see people being killed or beaten or abused. That's just not who we are as a people. So I think that's where to start.
Why does it seem to the untrained eye that this is simple? The local police departments do a fairly fine job of keeping things in order, following the law. And certainly they know their jurisdiction. They're usually from that area. So that's a little bit of an edge. It works. And if there were protests and things going on, violence probably wouldn't ensue. Probably. And now we bring in, outside entities, and it goes awry. I just look at that and say, why does it have to be like that? It seems pretty simple.
It doesn't. And you're right, it is simple. And the first step is to understand that the key to managing this situation is what are the rules of engagement for ICE and the Border Patrol in these big cities. What are they allowed to do? What are they expected to do? And what has been deemed to be off limits for them? And why are these processes, you can call them standing orders, general orders, police departments have different terminology depending on the department.
Sure.
But they all have policies in place that are reviewed by lawyers, deemed to be constitutional, generally speaking, presented to judges from time to time if there's a dispute. And all of this is intended to allow for effective policing and effective law enforcement without interfering with people's constitutional rights.
It almost seems, Carol, that when it's the local police, they don't want to take a chance of going to court over conduct and things like that. But when you bring in these outside entities, it's almost as if they're running through the crowd doing whatever they're doing, and then they're just going to run off. And there's really no accountability in that regard because, hey, I don't work for that police department. I've got my own thing going on here. I'm in and I'm out. But then some challenges have presented. Why was this all haphazardly put together, this whole initiative from the beginning, without any kind of real definition of what's to be done?
Well, first of all, you have a notion at Homeland Security, ICE, in these agencies that because they're federal agents, they're not bound by any state rules or regulations. Okay, fine. However, most of these rules and regulations that they are thinking they're not bound by are generated by the 5th and 14th Amendment of the Constitution. So they may be articulated in a state and local government fashion, but they are in fact basic constitutional requirements.
Hey, come on, what's law got to do with it? That's essentially why we call this podcast that, because we have laws in place.
And this is not the first or last time that this program will fold back to the Constitution, which is the foundational document of our democracy. So, for example, people who are filming ICE agents while they are engaged in whatever they're engaged in. Generally speaking, this is perceived to be and deemed to be a constitutional right. You have a right to stand there. You have a right to film. You have a right to be left alone if you're not violating the law. It's not against the law to film law enforcement in action. There's no constitutional prohibition. In fact, the Constitution anticipates it. So why is it that ICE is making lists of people who film them? Why is ICE labeling them as domestic terrorists when all they're doing is exercising their constitutional rights? That is not clear to me. They're bound by the same constitutional principles as state and local police. Who would not do that?
Why do you think that's a challenge for them? What's the big deal?
I think that there is a notion that they are federal agents, that immigration law they are untouchable on because it is solely a federal purview, not a state law purview. And that they can just go do what they want because they're the ICE agents, they're federal agents, and they've got some powers that, and here's a place where we can talk about it, they have these non-judicial warrants. They have something called administrative warrants. And these are warrants that the agents themselves sign in order to enter property or seize people. One of the things that critics are looking at, and I would include many lawyers in that list of critics, is that those warrants are not sufficient to justify entries onto private property, and that it may be that whole warrant requirement needs to be reviewed. And it may be that all of those warrants have to be reviewed and approved by a judge, either a federal judge or an immigration judge. And if that power is given to the immigration judges, then they need to be free from any kind of retaliation for refusing to grant a warrant that doesn't appear to them to be justified. So we have a need for a meaningful warrant requirement because ICE should not be going on private property. They should not be using children to try to get their parents to leave the house. These are not practices that are wise. What we need is a meaningful warrant requirement.
I'm going to say this, and it doesn't apply to every situation, but would you say there is somewhat of an abuse of power?
There certainly are abuses. There are certainly activities that are unconstitutional. People can differ on whether abuse of power is the right term, but it's not wrong. It's a matter that people can discuss and have different opinions on. I do think some of what I've seen in the videos and some of what I've read in decisions as described by U.S. District Court judges after hearings does seem to be an abuse of power. Not all of it, but some of it.
If we didn't use that term, would a better term be confusion as to what they're allowed to do in a jurisdiction?
No, I think the correct term is unconstitutional.
Okay. All right. So let's pivot over. And again, we don't do politics here. This is just the view of what's going on. Democrats trying to get things done. Republicans trying to get things done in terms of this whole situation. Let's start with the Democrats. What are you seeing? What's the latest that you're looking at here with their initiatives?
So the Democrats have articulated 10 requirements that they want as part of an effort to fund ICE. Most of them are not particularly realistic because they require policymakers to try to perform executive functions, and it's not really their job. I understand the instinct to go there. The key thing they are looking at, however, is this warrant requirement that I mentioned. That is one of the reforms they want. They want a warrant requirement. They also want, and they haven't articulated it well, but I think it could be better articulated. They have things like stop racial profiling. That's very difficult to really administer. I think what they really want is ICE to provide them with a set of general and standing orders for their agents that are constitutionally consistent. That is to say, they are in line with the First and 14th Amendments. And if they're not, then those kinds of actions should be improper. And I think they're looking for the leadership of ICE to implement that kind of regulatory scheme, but also ICE needs to train its officers. I am not convinced that these officers are properly trained to operate in a city environment. I don't know that they understand always that it's not appropriate to treat citizens who are observing their conduct and filming it as domestic terrorists. That's not domestic terrorism. That's not illegal. That's not unlawful.
Let's pick a street in New York City, and police are making some arrests, whatever it might be. Could be drug, could be prostitution, doesn't matter, whatever it is. And it's going to happen. People are going to take out their phone. Just they want to go viral with the first posting of it, or they're doing it to document what's going. Whatever the reason is, it happens all the time.
Yes.
It seems like ICE agents are viewing it in a different way, like it's obstructing justice, but it's not like the person is in the face of anybody with their phone. They're just standing back and they got it going.
Yeah, and I think New Yorkers understand you don't get in the way of the police. And no one should be trying to obstruct law enforcement. But filming them, videoing them, taking their license numbers, taking their car numbers, taking pictures, that's not obstruction. That is constitutionally protected activity.
If it was the eyewitness news team from your local TV station showing up, do you think that they would get arrested? I think not.
What about Don Lemon?
Well, all right. Well, let's break that down. Let's take a look at that and what was actually going on there.
Well, obviously, what appears to have gone on, based on what I can tell, is that he found out that there was a group that was going to do a protest, and he tagged along. He may have done more than tag along. He may have, suggested to them how they should do things, less about what they're doing and more about, this is a better camera angle, this is a better way to do it, whatever he was doing. But all they did was protest. And it's a very interesting dilemma that's presented by what was done. And some of it depends on the details of what actually happened, which we don't have. Mm-hmm. But if all they did was enter a church building that was open,
yep.
In other words, the doors were open and there was an expectation of the public entering. And they enter and they make noise and they protest. Not entirely clear to me that isn't protected First Amendment activity. The government is leaning on the fact that the right to practice religion is also a protected First Amendment activity. And they are suggesting that the religious rights trump the speech rights. And I am not at all clear that that is the right view. In a matter of public concern, in this case, the public concern was that one of the pastors was an ICE agent. But in a matter of public concern, not clear to me that the First Amendment doesn't trump. And that is going to be the debate in the Lemon case. That's what's going to happen in the Lemon case. That's the real issue, which is, how does the court balance the rights of the congregation and the ministers against the protesters? Excuse me.
What? And I was referring, the journalist on the side of the street that got the camera. Hey, get a shot of that. This took place in a church, and it was the charges were conspiracy against religious freedom at a place of worship, possibly interfering with the exercise and the right of religious freedom. Those are the charges. So I think it's a little bit different, that essentially interfering with the house of worship and what was going on there. So that's that's not the street corner.
No, I don't entirely agree with that.
I'm just reading the charges.
Yeah, no, that's what the charges are. But the question is religion entitled? Is the practice, free exercise of religion, entitled to more protection than the free exercise of speech? Normally, that requires the courts to balance the relative rights of the parties. And even if you have a dispute about that, not entirely clear to me that if you are engaged in a constitutional exercise, you can be committing a crime even if there's some balancing test. It's not 100% clear, because this is a case where you've charged the First Amendment protesters, so this will be looked at from their perspective. So this is a very interesting case.
This one really is, isn't it?
Yes. And I think we all need to watch it. There are a couple of sort of amusing features to this. One is that the law firm that has been retained by Don Lemon as part of his team is the former acting U.S. attorney for the District of Minnesota, who recently quit his job over some of what was going on with ICE. So this is a man who has been dealing with all of these judges, these 14 or so district court judges, including the lady who has the case, the lady judge who has the case as the presiding judge. It's going to be interesting, because remember, we've seen some very tough decisions from all of these judges expressing great unhappiness with the interference of First Amendment rights already. And, judges are people too.
Before we run out of time, we talked about Democrats and what they're working on. What about Republicans, in your view?
In my view, the Republicans recognize that some of this is unattractive. As is traditional with the Republican Party, they tend to be more central government oriented, more pro-government power in these kinds of settings. The Democrats tend to be a little different, tend to be a little more, bottom up. So this is not an inconsistent position, and I think people should realize that it's a politically rational decision, and it's a policy-wise rational decision. I'm going to be interested to see how they defend these looser warrant requirements, because I think that's a place where they need to really think through their position. But the Republicans are trying to maintain the supremacy of the federal government. They're trying to maintain the supremacy, the law enforcement functions of ICE. A lot of them do not have big cities in their districts and are not as used to big city policing situations. They may not be aware always of the extent to which some of this is regulated and already regulated, even in their smaller cities. smaller cities have the same rules as bigger cities. It's just not necessarily as well known or publicized. So there may be some misapprehension about some of this, but in my estimation, there's a bona fide policy dispute on this warrant issue. I just think the better view is there should be judicial warrants. I think we will have safer streets, and we will have more reliable, predictable, and law enforcement with less area for abuse.
I find it fascinating that even though we spent about a half hour on this, we could go on. There's so many other aspects. AP reporting that in the last number of months, ICE agents, many of them arrested for misconduct and things like that. I mean, we didn't even get to that. And that, again, that's a news report. So much going on here. Love the feedback. Instant feedback, steve@gmail.com. If you've got a comment, a question, keep it anonymous if you feel so. Do that, and they can certainly connect with you directly. Carol, how do they do that?
At Sigmond, CSIGMOND @nasimond.com, and I do answer my emails.
I love the fact that you're plugged into every aspect of this. And again, an impartial legal view of what's going on here. And for the rest of us, kind of breaking it down so we understand it a little bit better. For that, I thank you and I appreciate it. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Steve. Be well.
You too. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
When I was little, I didn't talk for a long time. I liked things to always be the same. Anything new or different would scare and upset me. I was very sensitive to lights and sounds. It was almost like I had bigger eyes and ears than everyone else. So I built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. I didn't like looking people in the eye. It made me feel uncomfortable. I'd throw big tantrums over little things like when my socks didn't match. Sometimes I'd do the same things over and over. Until one day, I found out I had autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I learned how to live with it better.
You can see signs of autism in children as young as 18 months. Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.